Good morning, Unit 6. We're looking forward to a great conversation this morning. My name is Tom Vance. I'm a professor of education at Kansas State University. And my colleagues are.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean Arthurs, former history teacher and lawyer, and now I do some international training. And I'm really excited that you've saved your best display for last.
I'm Luana Davis. I am a law professor in Birmingham, Alabama at Samford University.
And would you please introduce yourselves to us?
Hello, my name's Micah Melville, and I'm a senior at West Windsor-Plainsboro High School North.
Hi, I'm Pranay Balayan, and I'm also a senior at West Windsor-Plainsboro High School North.
I'm Anushka Ashwin. I'm a senior at West Windsor-Plainsboro High School North.
Fantastic. We're here to talk about some issues in Unit 6, which, let's be honest, is the best unit. And we're going to be the best judges you see today. It's weird, but that's the way it's going to work. And in particular, we want to talk about the following questions. Thomas Hobbes noted that life in a state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. How has the human condition changed over time? And how is that change reflected in our expectations of government? Should the principles of natural rights or classical republicanism guide policy changes designed to improve the condition of all people? What are the most pressing domestic and global challenges facing Americans today and in the future? What policies can you suggest to address them? We are ready whenever you are.
The world we live in today moves so quickly, seldom do we recognize the greatest changes to the human condition. Over the last 65 years, the global literacy rate has risen 4% every 5 years. As political discourse changes the ideals of civic virtue and public participation, citizens around the world have demanded government accountability. Political protests in the later half of the 19th and 20th century shaped the political landscape. Monarchies, oligarchies, and authoritarian regimes were abandoned for more democratic institutions, which reflected the changing ideals of the government. At the end of 2017, 96 of 167 countries with populations more than 500,000 were democracies. This change in the human condition is at the very heart of development, as it is the catalyst to a more free world.
The principles of classical republicanism should guide policy changes that are designed to improve the conditions of all people. As Roman philosopher Cicero states, nature has given to mankind such a compulsion to do good and such a desire to defend the well-being of the community. Inspired by Greco-Roman philosophy, the founders created a form of government which they aspired to not only reflect the ideals of the common good, but have it coexist with natural rights. After all, the Constitution declares we the people and to form a more perfect union. The notion of the common good has allowed Americans to rally together to face common perils. The World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and the 9/11 Memorial reflect the multitudes of ways in which Americans have fought against injustice together. The policy changes such as the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and the Patriot Act following 9/11 were inspired by ideals of classical republicanism. If the government were guided by the principles of classical republicanism, it would be striving to meet the needs of the common good, improving the conditions of all people.
An issue of both international and domestic concern is climate change, which has and will continue to drastically affect the lives of millions. Governments must hold large corporations accountable for their greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint. Through exploring possible solutions such as a carbon tax, subsidizing renewable energy, and working on an international level with other countries, America can take a leading role in this issue. Another major issue needing attention is the increased arrests of Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, demonstrating China's blatant disregard for human rights. To defend the fundamental right to religion, the U.S. must lead in the creation of an international coalition that firmly believes in religious freedom. Through multinational economic sanctions, economic pressure will be placed on China to reverse its actions towards Uyghur Muslims.
Other domestic issues include police brutality. Following the decades of repeated murders of many Black Americans, people demand justice and reform for all instances where racial disparities are present, such as in healthcare, education, and in incarceration. Those who spoke out in support of the Black Lives Matter movement support and serve to the idea that silence is complicity. The United States needs to make an effort to dismantle systemic racism through policy and restructuring. One way to do this would be to change the way that police training occurs, implementing racial bias consciousness training, as well as promoting de-escalation tactics.
Another issue plaguing our country is education accessibility. Public education should never have to imply inferior education. However, for millions of students in lower income communities, they're subjected to worse standards of learning, of resources, and of assistance. There are many policy changes that can aid this, to begin with teachers. We need to make it easier for teachers to access the education they need to teach, and to incentivize better teaching through better salaries. We also need to focus on providing more funding into public education, granting categorical grants for resources and buildings to create a better educational environment for all students. Finally, higher education should be more easily accessible without the burden of student loans falling disproportionately on the already poor.
Barack Obama wisely said, if you had to choose one moment in history in which you would be born and you didn't know ahead of time who you were going to be, you choose right now. With policies that assure the rights of people while promoting the common good around the world and at home, the arc of change will continue to bend towards justice.
Great timing there. Thanks, team. All right, let's start with one of these. Big weekend on the Jersey Shore last weekend has led to a super spreader event. So the governor of New Jersey has come down with a new mandate. It says masks must be worn every time you leave the house, or you will pay a fine. What would be the natural rights and Republican position on this, and any other thoughts you have? Okay, so governor of New Jersey, masks must be worn every time you leave the house or you pay a fine. Please tell me how the natural rights and Republican positions would look at this.
The natural rights and the Republican positions would look at this mandate, and they would see it as an impediment on the individual rights of the person. They believe, or they would believe, that the people have the right to decide if they were to wear a mask in public or not. And I disagree with this sentiment. I believe that in order to protect public health, everyone should do their best in order to do so. And if that requires wearing a mask in public, then so be it. As long as people can be protected and as long as we can go back to some sort of normality, and if this is the way to do it, then I would absolutely support that mandate.
And to add on to what my colleague said, the classical republicanism view would focus on giving up these individual rights to not wear a mask in order to promote the ideals of the common good, in which case, this is something we do a lot of the time. We pay taxes, for example. We give up our individual rights to retain all of our money so that we can provide services for the common good. It's the same principles that we're seeing in classical republicanism that support the idea of wearing a mask in order to protect the safety of everyone else.
I wanted to switch your focus to the United States as a global force. One of the questions that is often asked of the United States is its contributions, and sometimes outsized contributions to global efforts. In other words, the United States donates or gives more to global efforts and challenges than other countries. Do you think that that is out of a sense of classical republicanism? And if so, is that something that the United States should be doing? In other words, should the United States be funding basically large parts of global initiatives?
Yes, we do believe that this sentiment is part of the classical republicanism ideals. The United States acts as a global advocate for other countries by providing foreign aid and assistance simply because it can. It's a leading powerhouse and it has one of the greatest economies in the globe. This gives the United States the power to be able to donate to these foreign countries and help prosper the common good around the globe. And I believe that this is something that we should continue to practice. Rather than aggressive military tactics against countries to promote our ideals, it is better to provide monetary aid and sustenance to these countries in order for them to have the same economic growth as us to adopt our ideals.
You mentioned that our expectations for government have increased over the years. I'm wondering, do you think we expect too much from our government now? Why or why not?
I think that the American people have certain expectations of the government, and it's not necessarily that they expect too much, but it's just the idea of basic rights and beliefs that people should be granted, especially when they agree with the government. As outlined, people have the right to disband and disable that government if they see fit, and people just have expectations. And some of those expectations may be the right to healthcare, the right to education, the right to accessibility to different resources. And so people have those expectations of the government, not be it that they are too much, but it's just the idea that people have basic rights and the government is there to provide such things.
So all of those things that you just mentioned are things that the government should provide to people. Isn't that in stark contrast to our tradition in the United States, where the Constitution primarily protects things the government can't do to people? And if those things become rights, if those positive things, if we say that the government must do these things for people, are there any risks to elevating those ideas to rights?
There are definitely possible risks, and I think some of the risks relate back to what the founders saw as a too powerful national government, a government which would take over the rights of the individual people. However, I do believe that within the Constitution itself, we still have some positive rights, such as the government's job to provide proper defense for criminals. These positive rights are things that the government should also expand on. As we see, tradition is changing. Our expectations of what the government does for us is becoming more concrete as we have activism and protests for the government's ability to protect our own rights.
I hear you advocating for a system of classical republicanism. Do you think that that was the intent of the founders, or do you think protecting natural individual rights was more the focus of the Constitution?
I definitely think that focusing on natural and individual rights was the focus of the Constitution, and I think that was a reactionary policy to what the British rule was at the time. They were under the rule of a tyrant, and they believed that these individual rights were what was important to continue with building an ideal democracy in a country. And these rights are still necessary and important today. We should continue to protect natural rights. But I think we're also starting to see a movement towards proving that natural rights can coexist with ideals of classical republicanism. We have to find a proper balance or a mix of the two ideals so that we still promote the common good while retaining our own individual rights.
Real quick follow-up, is there any way that a natural rights philosopher can get to promoting the common good? Is there any conception of natural rights that promotes the common good?
Well, I think that there are some policies that we apply to ourselves as individuals that still impact the common good. So, for example, our right to freedom, because we have our own individual right to freedom, we expect everyone else to have these same rights. Because we expect rights for ourselves, we expect other people to have the same rights, and I believe that this expectation also promotes a semblance of the common good.
Good. Mr. Arthurs.
There was a coup in Myanmar at the beginning of February. Does that concern the United States at all on any level? Our business at all?
So the coup in Myanmar should concern the United States because we do have an obligation not only to ourselves, but
Go ahead and finish your thought.
sorry, we do have an obligation to not only ourselves, but other countries in the world, that when we recognize that there are injustices occurring and taking place, that we use our voice as one of the strongest economies in the world and one of the strongest countries in the world in terms of the military, that we actually support them. So whether that be boots on the ground or whether that be more diplomatic talks between countries, as a group, we believe that diplomatic talks are one of the best ways to do things as opposed to engaging in things physically. That's what needs to take place for the United States in order to aid the people in Myanmar with the coup.
Thank you very much, Unit 6, an excellent discussion and examination of a broad range of issues. That's the great thing about Unit 6, right? Is that it's really maybe the best test of your overall knowledge, because there's a little philosophy, there's a little history, there's a little law, and you successfully combined all of those things. I pushed you a little bit on the positive and negative rights thinking, and you came up with one. I loved it. That we do have some positive rights that are protected now. I like the right to count. That's something a government has to give to you. That's excellent. I love that. But so does my dog. Love that. My dog loves the right to counsel. It's her favorite right, in fact. So that was good. I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about where we draw the line between what we expect from government and what we should expect from government, and what's best left over to individuals and groups of us to do, right? So it's not just the government that provides for the common good. It's also us. We have some responsibility in all of this, after all. And I would have liked to have heard a little bit about that. So does my dog. My dog likes the whole idea of citizen responsibility too. So thank you very much. It was really an excellent presentation.
Thank you, team. I echo my colleagues' sentiments around, especially the wide-ranging nature. I mean, we were touching on, we had public education, we had loan debt in there, we had China repressing different. I mean, the range of the examples I thought was quite impressive. Would have liked one thing going forward just to think about is always try to anchor or root something in the Constitution or in Supreme Court cases if you can. Like, come back to that, especially when we're looking at arguments that might have that there is some room to anchor them in Supreme Court cases or principles or specific sections of the Constitution, any of those. But thank you. Love the wide-ranging examples, and especially Anushka there towards the end. Like, you could see like some of that fire wanting to get into some of these discussions. And I wish we had a lot longer. I'm sure you all are glad to be wrapping it up. Thanks, team.
I agree with my fellow judges. Very good presentation, and like Professor Arthurs, I love the sort of wide range of examples that you gave. If I had one piece of advice, I would like to see you sort of spread out a little bit more on some of the responses. But it could have been, you could have done that because you could have said, okay, well, this person will handle all questions about global, this person will handle all questions about the Constitution. And you might want to say, okay, well, let's look at that and make sure that we spread things out a little bit more in terms of participation.
Okay, thank you, everybody.